how did that experience or the pain of marginality with, now we've talked about class, we've talked about sexual orientation and gender, how did that translate into your career work, into your research work, into the stories that you investigate?
Well, what happened is I was beginning to teach. One of the first courses I taught at BU was counseling bilinguals. And there was no literature. I mean, I had to basically make it up. This was, early 70s, mid 70s. So there was practically no literature. So there was this need to try to put something out to the students, and just saying things in class sometimes was not enough. Plus people were there were conferences, be it Association for Women in Psychology or APA or what was then the APGA, the Counseling Association, and regional groups and etc. that wanted information on this, because you're teaching a course on counseling bilinguals, you know everything about it. Well, I knew nothing. There was nothing to get it from. But so I started, say, talking at a conference, and people ask, can I publish that paper? And then the paper is published, and then some people start writing and saying, could you mail me this paper? This is before email, remember? So, or websites or things of that sort. So can you mail me the paper? So I found myself more and more, and there were some papers that created some reaction in people that almost surprised me. I wrote a paper. I presented at a conference in New York about sexual issues of Latinos. I needed to know what was going on here, so one way of trying to make sense was to try to write it. And I did this presentation. The paper got published as a chapter in a book that was sort of the proceedings from the conference. And it was constant. Wherever I went, there was somebody saying, oh, that paper was so important. Oh, I'm so glad, particularly young Latinas. I am so glad that I read your paper, because it made me understand that it's not just me. And I was hearing them and at the same time thinking, maybe I have something to say. That kind of, this is not just for me to make sense of my own experience. It seems to be resonating with the experience of other people. There was a conference on lesbian psychology in Boston, and I wanted to make sure that there was something having to do with Latinas in the conference. So rather than just talking about it, what I did that time is that I sent out questionnaires to whoever I could think of, and I got about 30 responses. And out of those responses, I created an article that has been published and published and published and published, and people ask for copies of it, on issues of identity of Latina lesbians. So it was a mixture of my needing to make sense of my experience, my needing also to say, this is here, because there would be a lesbian conference, or there would be a women's conference, or there would be a Latino conference, multicultural conference, whatever, APA. And it seemed that there was only one thing, like we are going to be talking only about this, and these other women, or these other sexual experience, or this other ethnic experience, or whatever, it's not even spoken to. So I started all this writing trying to say, here, you have to look at this, in the middle of conferences, for example. I remember one conference, I wouldn't mention what it was, but I remember I was there presenting something with a group of my students about how the effect of our own ethnicity, whatever that might be, affected who we were. And there were more presenters than audience in the room. Couple of times we also found that nobody even came. to things that had to do with cultural issues or things that had to do with sexual orientation issues. And it was very hard because it was like, well, that story I told this morning also of trying in a group of Latinas to talk about sexual orientation, and somebody saying lesbianism is an illness we catch from American women. So, okay, so who did I got it from, you know? It was very hard to say, well, I just wanted, and sometimes people who were very politically aware would make statements about it was American imperialism that created homosexuality in Latin America. And it was like, just what are you talking about? So it was, you know, the need to put that in. Of course, in church, it was impossible to talk about sexual orientation. And in places, even to this day, when I'm talking about in groups of gays or lesbians, anything having to do with religion or spirituality, frequently I get told, oh, please, that's so childish, or that's so old, or whatever, or that, I can't believe that you still believe in those fairy tales, or all sorts of things like that. So that constant having people you know, say things that contradicted my own experience, what I said. I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable with myself. I don't have any problem with myself. The problem is when people are pushing me and saying, no, that is not true, or you're disloyal to this group, or you're not doing what needs to be done, or, well, I think you remember at the Latino conference you organized in Rhode Island, practically no one came to my session on Latina lesbians. And I remember writing with one of the speakers, and they asked me what I was presenting, and I said what I was presenting, and they said, this was a distinguished Latino psychologist, is that important? And I said, well, it's important to me, and I think it's important to other people. And then, you know, the satisfaction that comes when, like in that section, in that session of that meeting, some young women would say, I am so glad that I read your book because it's speaking about my experience. Finally, I see that, you know, this is not just me, that this is a way of understanding things. And so thank you for doing that. And that sort of keeps me going.